It was a Tuesday morning at O'Hare International Airport, and the departure board was cycling through delays and gate changes like a nervous tick. Gate 73 hummed with the familiar rhythm of boarding, scanning beeps, rolling luggage, the murmured half-conversations of travelers on their phones. Sarah Mitchell stood at the counter in her Navy airline blazer, checking passengers through with practiced efficiency. She had been reassigned to ground handling 3 weeks ago, pulled from her regular duties as a first officer for Lakefront Airlines after a string of passenger complaints that her supervisors deemed serious enough to warrant what they diplomatically called a learning rotation. She hated every minute of it, though she would never have admitted that to Director Williams, who had arranged the transfer. After Gate 73 was done, she and Tom were scheduled to rotate over to Gate 72 for the next departure. That was how ground shifts worked, one boarding after another, a conveyor belt of goodbyes. She was scanning a boarding pass when a man's voice cut through the noise, not loud, but urgent in a way that made her look up immediately. "Excuse me, please, could you wait just a moment?" He was in his late 70s, maybe older, with a thin frame that seemed to carry more worry than weight. His white hair was combed neatly to one side, and he wore a pressed button-down shirt tucked into khaki trousers, the kind of careful outfit a man puts on when he's going somewhere that matters. His name, according to his boarding pass, was Harold Patterson. "I can't find my wife," he said, and his voice cracked on the last word. "We came through security together. We were walking straight ahead, and I turned around for just 1 second, and she was gone." Sarah glanced at her colleague, Tom, who was managing the boarding queue. The gate was scheduled to close in 12 minutes. "Mr. Patterson, could you wait here for just a moment? We'll help you find her." "But the gate—" His eyes darted to the jetway door. "The gate is closing soon. The plane can't wait." "Just a few minutes," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady and warm. "We won't hold things up. Just a few minutes, I promise." Harold looked at her with the kind of desperate gratitude that made Sarah's chest tighten. She turned to Tom. "The old man needs help," she said quietly. "His wife is lost somewhere in the terminal. Do you know if we can talk to the gate supervisor about holding?" Tom shook his head slowly. "We can't delay the whole flight for one passenger, Sarah. You know that. If we hold here, it backs up everything on the taxiway. Best thing we can do is find his wife and rebook them on the next departure." Sarah nodded. He was right, and she knew it. She turned back to Harold. "Mr. Patterson, is your wife's name Margaret Patterson?" Yes, that's her." His hands were trembling slightly as he held out his phone, showing a photo. "But there's something you should know, a public address announcement with her name. It won't work. She won't recognize her own name. Not anymore." Sarah paused. She let that settle for a moment, then looked at the photo on the screen. A woman in her 70s, smiling faintly, wearing a purple cardigan over a lavender blouse with matching purple walking shoes. She was holding a small wicker basket filled with grapes. "What is she wearing today?" Sarah asked gently. "That's today," Harold said. "That's what she's wearing. Purple clothes, purple shoes, and she's carrying the grapes. She wouldn't leave the house without them." Sarah took a breath. "Okay, I've got it. Let me go find her. Tom, I need a radio. I'll stay in contact." Tom handed her a walkie-talkie. "The Portland flight at 72 boards in about 90 minutes, so we've got some room, but don't lose track of time." "I won't." She was already moving. She keyed the radio and called the terminal's operations desk. "This is Mitchell at Gate 73. We have a missing passenger. Elderly woman, approximately 75 years old, wearing a purple cardigan, lavender blouse, purple walking shoes. She's carrying a wicker basket of grapes. She may appear confused or disoriented. Her husband is waiting at Gate 73. If any staff spot her, please direct her to the nearest service desk and radio me. Appreciate the help." She deliberately left out the name. It would do Margaret no good to hear it echoing from the ceiling. What mattered was the purple, the grapes, the details that someone walking past might actually notice. The operations dispatcher confirmed and pushed the description out as a staff alert across Concourse C. Sarah moved quickly through the terminal, scanning every bench, every shop window, every cluster of waiting passengers. She passed a bookstore, a Hudson News, a Starbucks with a line out the door. She checked the women's restrooms near Gate 68, asked a janitor if he'd seen anyone matching the description, peered into the interfaith chapel where a businessman sat alone with his head bowed. Nothing. 5 minutes passed, then 7. Sarah felt the clock pressing against her ribs. She was approaching the family lounge near Block C when her radio crackled. "Mitchell, this is Lopez at the Block C information desk. I think I've got your lady. She's in the arcade area near the family lounge. Purple clothes, grapes, the whole thing. She seems pretty confused. She's talking to some young guy who looks like he doesn't know what to do." "Copy. I'm 30 seconds away." She broke into a jog. She found Margaret Patterson standing in front of a claw machine, talking earnestly to a young man in his 20s who looked deeply uncomfortable. He was wearing a hoodie and sneakers and carrying a backpack, and Margaret had one hand on his arm and was looking up at him with absolute certainty. Lopez, a compact woman in an airline vest, was hovering a few feet away, keeping a watchful distance. "Danny?" Margaret was saying. "Danny, my boy, why won't you talk to me? Are you still angry with me?" The young man's face was a mixture of pity and panic. "Ma'am, I've told you. I'm not Danny. I don't know you. I'm really sorry." "You are my Danny. I'd know you anywhere. You're my son." "Mrs. Patterson?" Sarah stepped forward carefully, the way you might approach a bird you didn't want to startle. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm Sarah. Your husband Harold is waiting for you." Margaret didn't look at her. She kept her grip on the young man's arm. "Tell him, Danny. Tell this girl you're my son." The young man caught Sarah's eye with a look of helpless appeal. "Can you please? I have to board. My flight's leaving." "I'm so sorry," Sarah said. "Go ahead. I've got her." He pulled away gently, and Margaret reached after him, her fingers closing on air. The young man hesitated a few steps away, looking back with a stricken expression, the look of someone who knows they are doing the right thing and hates it anyway. Then he turned and walked quickly toward his gate, adjusting his backpack straps, not looking back again. Margaret's face crumpled. She sank to her knees on the polished terminal floor, still clutching the basket of grapes, and began to cry. "Danny, my boy, my son, please don't leave me again." Sarah knelt beside her. Around them, travelers slowed, glanced, and then quickened their pace, the universal instinct to look away from someone else's pain. Sarah glanced up at Lopez and mouthed, "Thank you. I've got this." Lopez nodded, gave a small wave, and headed back toward her information desk, casting one last look over her shoulder before she rounded the corner. Now it was just Sarah and Margaret on the cold floor in front of the claw machine. Sarah didn't argue. She didn't correct. She placed her hand on the older woman's back and held it there, steady and warm, the way you might calm a child waking from a nightmare. "It's okay," she said softly. "You're okay. Harold is waiting for you. He misses you." Margaret shook her head, still crying, but the sobs were losing their sharpness. Sarah stayed where she was, kneeling on the cold tile, saying nothing more, just keeping her hand on Margaret's back. A minute passed, then another. The arcade machines blinked their neon lights indifferently. Finally, Margaret looked up. Her eyes were wet and bewildered, but something in them had shifted. The storm moving on, leaving confusion in its wake instead of anguish. "Harold?" she said, as if hearing the name for the first time. "Your husband. He misses you. Let me take you to him." Sarah helped Margaret to her feet. The older woman's purple cardigan was dusty from the floor, and several grapes had fallen from the basket and been crushed underfoot, leaving small purple stains on the white tile. Margaret noticed the stains and frowned at them, as though they were someone else's problem. Sarah steadied her arm and they began walking, slowly, back through the concourse toward Gate 73. It was a long walk, 10 minutes at Margaret's pace, and Sarah felt the radio in her pocket like a ticking clock. But she matched Margaret's steps and didn't rush her. Halfway there, Margaret stopped, reached into her basket, selected a handful of the best-looking grapes, the ones that hadn't been crushed, and pressed them firmly into Sarah's hand. "Here," Margaret said, with the grave authority of someone bestowing a gift of great importance. "You take these. You've been so kind." Sarah looked at the grapes in her palm, purple and cool and a little sticky where one had split. "Thank you, Margaret. That's really sweet." "Danny likes the red ones best," Margaret added, as if this explained everything. Sarah closed her fingers gently around the grapes and kept walking. Harold saw them coming from 50 feet away and rose from the bench where he'd been sitting. Behind him, Gate 73 was quiet. The jetway door closed, the boarding counter dark, the flight long gone. Harold didn't look at the empty gate. He may have watched his plane leave, or he may have kept his eyes on the concourse the whole time, waiting for a flash of purple. Either way, when he saw Margaret, his face collapsed with relief, and whatever he'd lost in that departure didn't seem to register at all. "Maggie, Maggie, there you are!" He took her hands, and then he saw the state of her, the dusty clothes, the tear-stained face, and his expression shifted into something practiced and tender, something he had clearly done 1,000 times before. "Maggie, sweetheart, I've told you 100 times, Danny isn't here. He's in Denver, remember? We're going to Denver to see him today. That's the whole reason we're at the airport. We're going to celebrate his birthday." Margaret blinked. Something in his words seemed to land. "Denver?" "Yes, Denver. Now let me clean you up." He looked at Sarah. "Do you have a tissue?" Sarah handed him a small packet of tissues from her pocket. Harold began carefully brushing the dust from Margaret's cardigan, dabbing at a stain on her sleeve. A dark smear of grape juice had soaked into his own shirt just below the pocket where Margaret had leaned against him. "Where are my grapes?" Margaret said suddenly, looking at the basket. Several had been crushed, their juice leaking through the wicker. "Harold, the grapes!" "Some of them got a little squished, sweetheart, but look." He picked through the basket with his long, careful fingers. "These ones are fine. These are perfect. Danny will love them." "Danny likes grapes," Margaret said, and for the first time she smiled. "He does. He always has. Now come on, let's go catch our plane." Sarah watched them, and something in her throat ached. She was about to lead them to the rebooking counter when Harold turned to her. Margaret had wandered a few steps toward the terminal window and was pressing her fingertip against the glass, tracing the outline of a plane on the tarmac. Harold dropped his voice so she couldn't hear. "Young lady," he said quietly, "I should tell you something so you understand." Sarah waited. "Danny isn't in Denver. Danny's been gone for 20 years. The words landed like stones dropped into still water. "He was our only child, left home at 18 to work out west. He was renting a little apartment in Denver, a basement unit. There was a gas leak, carbon monoxide. He went to sleep one night and never woke up." Harold's voice was steady, the way a voice gets when it is told the same story too many times to break any more. He glanced sideways at Margaret. She was still at the window, tapping the glass now, smiling at something on the runway. He turned back. After it happened, Margaret couldn't accept it. She just couldn't. And over the last couple of years, her mind has been— He tapped his temple gently. "It's gotten worse. She doesn't remember that he's gone. She thinks he's still in Denver, still working, still alive. Every few months, she insists we have to go see him for his birthday. And I take her. I book the flights, I pack the bags, I buy the grapes because Danny always loved grapes, and we go. We fly to Denver, and I take her around the city, and I tell her Danny's busy at work, but he'll see us tomorrow. And then the next day, I say the same thing. And after a few days, she's content, and we fly home." He paused. 20 years I've been doing this. 20 years of birthday trips for a boy who isn't there." Sarah's vision blurred. She blinked hard, pressing her lips together because she was in uniform and on duty, and there were passengers watching. But something inside her had shifted, some tectonic plate of feeling that she couldn't push back into place. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Patterson," she managed. Harold shook his head. "Don't be sorry. We're managing. We always manage." He looked at Margaret, who was now waving at a baggage cart driver through the glass. She's still here. That's what matters. Sarah led them to the rebooking counter at D11, where an agent named Kevin processed their ticket change to the next Denver flight without questions. The next departure was out of Gate 42, about a 15-minute walk back through the concourse. It wouldn't board for another hour. "Mr. Patterson, why don't you and Margaret sit here for a bit?" Sarah said, gesturing to a row of seats near the counter. "Rest your feet. I need to take care of a few things, but I'll be back shortly." Harold eased Margaret into a chair, and Margaret immediately began sorting her grapes again, picking out the good ones with meticulous care. Harold sat beside her, one hand resting lightly on her forearm, a habit, Sarah guessed, born from years of making sure she didn't wander. He looked settled, watchful, like a man who had done this 10,000 times before. She felt safe leaving them. She stepped away and radioed the operations desk first, asking them to relay a message to the Gate 42 crew. 2 elderly passengers on the Denver rebooking, one with cognitive difficulties requesting first-row economy if available and early boarding. The dispatcher confirmed within a minute the seats were open. Then she walked to a clothing shop 2 gates down. She'd passed it 100 times on her shifts and knew they carried men's dress shirts. She scanned the rack, guessed Harold's size at a medium based on his slim frame. It was a guess, and she knew it might be wrong, but it was the best she could do, and picked a pale blue button-down. Then she ducked into the terminal's fresh market next door and bought a small container of grapes. She paid for both out of her own wallet, stuffed the receipt into her pocket, and walked back. The whole detour took about 10 minutes. When she returned, Margaret was showing Harold a grape she deemed especially perfect, and Harold was agreeing with her solemnly. They hadn't moved. "Mr. Patterson, Mrs. Patterson, your new seats are in the first row of economy, extra legroom, and it's quieter up there. The crew at Gate 42 knows you're coming, and they'll let you board first." She held out the shopping bag. "And this is for you." Harold opened it. Inside was the blue shirt and the container of fresh grapes. "Your shirt got stained," Sarah said, nodding at the grape juice below his pocket. "And I thought Margaret might want some grapes that were intact." Harold stared at the bag for a long moment. Then he looked at Sarah, and his eyes were bright. "Young lady, I can't accept this." "Please. It's nothing." "It's not nothing, and the airline didn't buy this. You did." Sarah smiled. "Then consider it a gift from me, and if you won't take it, I'll have to give back the grapes your wife gave me. And I've already eaten one, so that would be awkward." It was true. She'd eaten one on the walk back with Margaret, sweet and tart, while the older woman wasn't looking. Harold's jaw worked. He held the shirt up against his chest. It looked about right. "If my boy were still alive," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "he'd be about your age." They stood there for a moment, the 3 of them, in the middle of the busiest airport in the Midwest, while the world rushed past them. "Let me walk you to your gate," Sarah said. She took Margaret's arm and Harold walked on the other side, and they moved slowly through the concourse together. Margaret pointed at things as they passed, a display of Chicago souvenirs, a child eating an ice cream cone, an airplane visible through the window, with the wide-eyed wonder of someone seeing it all for the first time. Harold translated her observations patiently, filling in context she couldn't provide, building a world around her that was safe and comprehensible. At Gate 42, Sarah handed them off to the boarding crew, who were waiting with kind faces and a wheelchair they'd brought just in case. "Take care of yourself, Mr. Patterson," Sarah said. "Take care of each other." Harold took her hand and squeezed it once. "Thank you, Sarah, for everything." Margaret looked at Sarah and tilted her head, as if trying to place her. Then she smiled, a bright, unguarded smile, and patted Sarah's cheek. "You're a good girl," she said. "Danny would like you." And then they were gone, swallowed by the jetway, and Sarah stood at the gate and watched the door close. She stayed a moment longer than she needed to. The gate area emptied around her, the last few passengers collecting their things, a gate agent powering down the screen. She thought about Harold, somewhere in the cabin now, folding the new shirt into his lap, sorting the good grapes from the bad. She thought about how he would do this again in a few months, and again after that. How he would keep buying plane tickets and packing bags and carrying grapes across the country to a city that held nothing but a memory, and how he would do it without complaint, without hesitation, because that was what was left of his love, and he would not set it down. She took a breath, turned, and walked back through the concourse. The remaining grapes Margaret had given her were still cupped in her hand, slightly warm now. She carried them all the way back to Gate 72 and set them down on a napkin at her station, where Tom was running through the pre-boarding checklist for the Portland flight. He glanced up. "Everything sorted?" "Everything sorted." Tom studied her face for a second. "You okay?" "Yeah." She straightened her blazer. "Yeah, I'm good." She looked at the grapes on the napkin. Purple, bruised, sweet. She ate one. Tom went back to his checklist, but a few minutes later, when Director Williams's assistant called down to ask about a staffing question, Sarah heard Tom say, almost as an afterthought, "Oh, and you might want to let Williams know about Mitchell and the Pattersons this morning. She went above and beyond." He said it casually, the way ground crew talk about each other when something goes right, not making a big deal of it, just making sure the right people heard. Sarah pretended she hadn't noticed. Later that afternoon, Director Williams came through the concourse on his rounds and stopped at Sarah's station. He was a tall man with a military bearing and a reputation for fairness that was occasionally indistinguishable from coldness. "Mitchell, how's the rotation treating you?" "Very well, sir. I've been learning a lot." He studied her for a moment. "I heard about what you did this morning, the Pattersons." Sarah said nothing. "And I also heard you bought a shirt and grapes out of your own pocket." "It seemed like the right thing to do." Williams nodded slowly. "The complaints that landed you here, they said you lacked empathy, that you were technically excellent but cold with passengers, that you treated the job like a machine treats its inputs." He paused. "I'd say this morning suggests otherwise." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I think I needed to be on this side of the counter to understand what people actually need, sir. It's different when you're face to face." "It is." William straightened his tie. "I'll have you back in the cockpit by end of week, but I hope you'll take this with you." "I will, sir." He walked away. Sarah turned back to her counter, where the next wave of passengers was already forming, each one carrying their own invisible weight, their own Margarets and Harolds, their own baskets of grapes meant for someone who might or might not be waiting at the other end. She smiled at the first person in line. "Welcome, how can I help you?" Somewhere over Indiana, at 36,000 feet, Harold Patterson sat in the first row of economy with a fresh blue shirt and a basket of grapes on his lap. Beside him, Margaret had fallen asleep with her head against his shoulder, her face peaceful, dreaming perhaps of Denver, of a birthday party, of a boy named Danny who would be waiting at the gate with open arms, alive, smiling, forever young. Harold looked out the window at the clouds below, an endless white landscape that looked from up here like a world without edges or endings, and he held his wife's hand, and he held his grief, and he held the grapes, and he flew on toward the city where his son would never be. But they were going anyway. They always went. Because love, Harold had learned, does not require the truth to survive. It only requires someone willing to carry it, and he had been carrying it for 20 years. End.